Good evening, everybody. Is that what I do? It's lovely to welcome you this evening. This is a slightly different conversation from the ones we've had over the last few weeks, where it's been largely a case of interviewing somebody about their life and how their faith works out in it. And then next week will be different again, because we're starting a new Bible study series on the Ten Commandments as viewed in the light of the New Testament. But tonight we have a kind of an interim one in which, in the light of the fact that over the last year so many people have had to face grief and bereavement, we thought it would be good actually to talk a bit about how Christian faith affects you when you're bereaved and when you're grieving and mourning. So this evening I'd like to welcome Sally, who's going to be joining the conversation with me. And we asked Sally particularly because 10 years ago she became a widow, and so we felt she would have some relevant stuff to share. And obviously I've also had quite a string of bereavements, although thankfully I'm not a widow yet. So yes, I hope you will find this conversation helpful and upbuilding. Welcome, Sally.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Right. Okay, well, let's just get a little bit of background of you first, because obviously I'm Fiona, by the way, if anybody doesn't know that. But so yes, 10 years ago, David died. You know, just like to tell us briefly, you know, how he died, what happened then.
Yeah, sure. So I'd actually been, we'd been coming to the King's Church for about a year, and during that year David had started to become quite unwell, and at first it was just like reflux and indigestion and things. So he'd been backwards and forwards to the doctors quite a lot, various medications that he'd tried, and eventually he had an endoscopy and they took a biopsy and they said, well, it's fine, no cancer, just a bit of inflammation in the stomach and a bit red. And the biopsy didn't show anything in particular, so we carried on, and then he seemed to get worse, so they put him through to the hospital again for a CT scan this time, and we were still waiting for those results when he got so poorly and he was being sick all the time. He was in such a lot of pain that we did eventually, I think it was in the October of that year, we rang for an ambulance and they took him into hospital. And that was really the beginning of the end, to be honest. I mean, he in the October he went into the hospital, and he died in the January, so it was quite quick. But that process was quite horrible, because they told us it took them a long time to diagnose cancer. When they did, they said, oh, it's terminal. And then they said, oh, actually, we've made a mistake. It's not cancer. He's just got inflammation in his stomach. So we were on this bit of a roller coaster ride. And then they came back and said, no, actually, he does have cancer and it's terminal. Yeah, so, but thankfully, you know, I'm so grateful, and I know David was as well, that although he was in hospital for a couple of months, he was actually able to come home, which is what he really wanted. And he did end up dying in his own bed, which again is what he really wanted. So yes, I remember that was. Because you were with me, weren't you? Because Fiona stayed with me the night. Well, we didn't know it was going to be the night that he died. But Fiona had very kindly agreed to sleep on the settee so that I had some company. And then he did die that night, didn't he?
Yes. So really, although it was quite obviously a short process of illness, but you did have some time to prepare.
Yes.
Yeah. And do you think that was did that make it easier or harder, or what was the? Yeah,
so we kind of talked about this a little bit, haven't we? And obviously I don't know how it would feel to lose somebody suddenly, so I can't really compare, but I am just really grateful that we did have that time. So even though it was horrible watching somebody that you love deteriorate, and it was an absolute wrench, you know, knowing that I was going to lose him in that period of time. But actually, probably with Thor, I would prefer it that way than a sudden death, because we did have chance to say our goodbyes and to say, oh, you remember when I did that? I'm really sorry, and you know, and just all those kind of things that you want to say to somebody when you know you're not going to see them anymore.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was actually a blessing. A lot of it we couldn't do while he was in hospital. There were so many people around that we couldn't really do a lot of that talking. But in the few weeks that we had when he came home before he deteriorated so much, they were really precious times.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think, because I know. Obviously, I've talked to a lot of people over the years in various circumstances of bereavement, and it's sometimes even when you have been prepared, there are still things you wish you'd said.
Yes.
but often the thing that's been so very difficult when it's been unexpected. And I suppose for some people this last year, even if it's not been a kind of instant, you know, like they've had a car accident or something, but because of the separation, there hasn't been that opportunity to say things, and that's always a difficult thing if there's so much that you feel is unfinished business.
Yeah.
You know, so you found that helped, the fact that you were able to finish some of the business
so grateful for that.
at least.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yes, so that was a blessing in the midst of it all.
Yeah.
Yeah. I suppose in some ways though it's almost like the grieving begins before the loss.
Yes, it does.
You know.
Yeah.
I mean, well, as you know, I was caring for my parents in my mother's last 6 months and my dad's last 2.5 years, and that you know, actually watching them, because my mother also died of cancer, you know, so that was a really hard thing. But with my dad, it was dementia, and actually that was like losing somebody, and yet he hasn't gone yet.
Yes.
You know, that was a really hard thing almost. You know, it's almost like there's no closure because it's just going on, you know, and that I found very hard.
Yes, it is hard.
You know, and did you find, you know, when David was actually dying, did you get to the point of wishing it would be ended?
Yes, I did, yeah. I mean, it was like, I think I like the term living bereavement because they're still alive, but you are actually grieving, you are losing them, you're in the process of losing them. Because although David didn't have dementia, but the drugs he was on in the last few weeks did make him, he was very vague and glazed over, and he said some very peculiar things. I'm sorry, I forgot what you asked me.
Well, I was saying about, you know, did you find yourself getting to the stage actually where you were wishing really that it was over?
Yes, I
did. Even though you didn't want to let go either. You know,
exactly, yes. It was a very strange set of emotions because everything in you wants to hold on, but you can never, you know that it's never going to go back to how it was, and that it's inevitable that they are going to die. So yes, there's part of me that, you know, because I knew I couldn't have him back as he once was, that just wanted it all to be over, because everybody who was involved, everybody who's close, was so exhausted with the caring and the driving and the looking after him, and he was in pain, and, you know, you do wonder, what is the purpose in this? You know, what is the benefit for anybody in this? And when he died, I have to say the first emotion really was relief, absolute relief. Probably more than anything because for his sake I knew he was face to face with the Lord, and I thought for him it's all over, you know, the hardness of this life, the pain of what he's just been through, it's just all over for him. So that first emotion that I felt was relief. Yes,
that's but it's actually Jackie has just asked a question here. What or who did you find, or how did you find to keep on keeping on, Sally?
Yes, good question, Jackie. I think while David was in hospital, and actually probably while he was at home as well, it was a lot of adrenaline, really, to be honest. It kept me, you know, if I'm really honest, the adrenaline kept me going to a point because I had to keep going to the hospital to see him every day, and then when he came home I had to keep caring for him and looking after him, so that kind of on the one hand kept me going, but in terms of emotionally, I mean, really you have no choice is one thing I would say. Like in any difficulty in life, you don't have any choice really, but I was just very aware of God's I don't know how I would describe it really. I was kind of just aware really of God's, I don't even know if I would call it presence, but just an inner strength really. You know, that you know that God is in control, you know that God is sovereign. Nothing of what you believe about God, you know, him being good, him being a good father, working all things together for your good, and all of the kind of the basics, if you like, of the Christian faith that you believe. In a circumstance like that, you know they're all true. It comes down to the fact, are you going to trust him? Are you going to trust him? Are you going to believe him? So that's kind of, that, I suppose that was the inner strength, although I wouldn't actually say I had inner strength. I was absolutely, you know, shaken to the core. But also family and friends, so many people praying. and family and friends getting involved and supporting me. So I was going through life a little bit in a daze, and I was like, moved here, moved there, let's do this now. And my family came over and drove me over to the hospital as well, because I wasn't really in a fit state to drive safely. So I was kind of manoeuvred a little bit through life as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in a sense, you feel like the Lord provided you with people as well as Himself. I think that's quite important, because sometimes you need the sort of, well, as somebody put it, God with skin on.
Yeah.
Because obviously it's the Lord Himself there, but yes, and the right people alongside.
Yes.
Are such an encouragement. You don't want people who sap your.
No, that's
faith.
right.
You want people who build you up.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. I was going to ask you something that's just gone out of mind. Would you believe? Yeah. Oh yes, when you were saying about being in a bit of a daze, so of course, if any book you read on bereavement, and I know you've read some, they always say the first response you have is a kind of denial. It's almost like you block it out. And I know from my own experience that happens even when you're expecting it. I mean, with both my parents, I was sort of literally sitting by their deathbeds, knowing they would, in fact, thinking, are they going to breathe again? And they didn't. But then, in both instances, when they actually did die, it was a complete shock.
Yeah.
And I think that it's almost like it's a kind of, well, I think maybe it's a reaction God's sort of built into us to kind of shield you from that first impact. Is it no?
Yes.
You push it away, you don't believe it,
like a protection, a self-protection.
Yes, it is, because then it's going to be such a major adjustment to get used to living with that big hole in your life.
Yes.
Which when it's somebody who's been very close to you, that's going to be really difficult. Yeah. So did you find that too, that sort of
I did actually. When my grandmother died, which was a long time ago, she died of cancer, and I knew that she was going to die, and I had that shock, that sense of denial then, that you can't quite believe it, even though it was still a shock, even you knew it was coming. With David, I don't remember having that feeling of denial quite so much. Whether or not that was because, well, I know you just said that it still happens when you know that they're going to die, but no, I don't really remember having that sense of denial. I think in my head I was quite happy to not happy, but I was quite willing to accept it. Yes, willing to accept it, but also an anger about having to accept it. Yeah.
Yes, and of course I think that's another very common point. Again, if you read the manuals on the subject of bereavement, anger is always one of the other things that comes into it. So, tell us a bit about how you coped with that one.
With the anger, yes. Well, I don't really have a. Some people kind of see anger as a really bad thing. I think obviously it is bad if it's going to lead to sin and to hurting people through it. But I didn't really have an issue with myself being angry, and I just let it out. So while I was at home, I did quite a lot of thumping things, whether it be pillows on the bed, cushions on the settee, even doors, and I kicked doors, I screamed, I shouted, and I just let it all out. And I went into the middle of a field shortly after, but a few days after David died as well, and let a really good, had a good screaming session. Not the kind of thing that you do in like normal process of life, but I think it really helped me. It's just all about release, isn't it? Releasing those emotions, which is probably a lot more healthy than bottling them up.
Yes. Why do you think it is that death actually provokes this anger in us? What?
Well, can I read a bit from a book? Yeah. It's one paragraph, but it is quite a long paragraph, if you can bear with me with it. But I've just been reading this book. It's by Malcolm Duncan. It's called Good Grief. I actually got it because I wanted to read it to see if it would be helpful for a friend who's been recently bereaved, but I wouldn't recommend anybody reads it when they're going through the grief. But anyway, let me read this bit. He's talking about bereavement and going through the grief period. He says, we do not want to walk through it because death brings with it all the opposites of all the things that we were made for. It brings separation when we were made for community. It brings decay when we were made for flourishing. It brings despair when we were made for hope. There is nothing normal about death. We were created to live, not die. It doesn't matter whether we die young or old or at any other point in the span of our years. We were created in God's image. We were made to share his eternal life. Death is a foreign invader in our world, a destroyer, an unrelenting thief and charlatan in each of our journeys. And then he says, that has helped me to understand the reason the death of a loved one is so hard for us to process, is that we were never meant to die. And of course we know the Bible says, doesn't it, that death is an enemy, and it's the last enemy to be defeated.
That's right, yes.
We can't wait for that day.
Exactly. I think that's quite important because, you know, even secular books will tell you that anger's part of it. Yeah. And obviously we also know that sometimes anger is, for some people it feels a safer thing to have than grief because they can't face the grief. Yes. You know, and so getting angry is a good one. But often people get angry, some people get angry at God, you know, and if people either don't believe in God or don't want to get angry with God, they'll try to find somebody else, you know, the need to find somebody to blame. Because as you say, it needs letting out when you feel angry. Yeah. You know, and so, you know, if people can sort of try to blame the health service or blame somebody else, if only, the land of if onlys is a nightmare, isn't it? You know. Yes. But I agree with you. I think fundamentally the reason we get so angry is because death is alien. It's not meant to, and something in us knows this is not what was meant to happen. No. You know. And it's like it's a reality that we don't want to live with, we don't want to have to face. No, exactly. And you know, when it first hits you, I mean, I was about 3 or 4 when I first discovered that people died, and I can remember the horror of it hitting me, you know, and so I don't want to die, you know, and the whole sort of thing, it's an awful thing. And yes, the Bible explains it to us, you know, explains that no, it wasn't part of the original plan, and it's not part of the eventual plan either, you know. Death is going to hell. It says, you know, death and Hades are going to be thrown into the lake of fire. Well, that's a day I'm looking forward to, you know, and the fact that Jesus has defeated death by his resurrection is such a help. That's why I think, you know, one of the verses I always sort of think is very helpful for Christians on this particular subject is in Thessalonians. Let me just read you the relevant bit. That's what I was looking up when the camera came on. Where are we? Yes. Yes. We do not want you to be ignorant about those who fall asleep, i.e. die, or to grieve like the rest of men who have no hope. And that's the thing, it's not saying you won't grieve, you know, a proper Christian doesn't grieve. Yes. But he's saying, but we don't want you to grieve like those who have no hope. Yeah. You know, we believe that Jesus died and rose again, and so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. And that is a real sort of, it just makes a difference to your grief, the fact that you know it's not going to be permanent. Yes, it really does. Even though it feels like it's permanent at the time. But, you know, and for me, I know one of the, there's more than one place where it's mentioned, but the promise that really sustains me, you know, because as you know, over the last few years there's been a lot of grieving. But one of the promises that really sustains me is that bit, you know, God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Yeah. And that really comforts me, you know, because I think wiping away someone's tears, it's like it's acknowledging the grief. Yes, it's very tender. It's not sort of saying, oh, forget all that, there's nothing, you know, put it away, brush it under the carpet. It actually acknowledges it and deals with it in his tender, fatherly way. And he says, actually, one day there's going to be nothing more to cry about. Yes. And, you know, now you can dry your tears because the issue's sorted. That's lovely, isn't it? Makes such a difference. It does. Yeah.
One of the verses I held on to was, after David had died, was absent from the body, present with the Lord in 2 Corinthians 5. Right. So that really helped me, because I was dealing with obviously my loss and my life issues, but also, you know, worrying about David, because when you've been married to somebody, obviously you care, your life is all about caring for that person. Well, maybe not all about that person, but you know, a big deal of it is about caring for that person. And so that didn't kind of stop after he'd died. You know, and there's still that feeling of, oh, where is he? What's happened? Is he okay? And then just remembering, you know, absent from the body, present with the Lord. And I could kind of shelve that worry and think, no, David's okay, he's fine. And I used to imagine, and actually I still do, I imagine him like he was when he was alive, but on his best day, you know, when he was full of joy and happiness, and I think he's like that now all the time, but probably 100,000 times, you know, more full of joy and fulfillment. So that is just, for me, that was just a real comfort, you know, just to know that he's now okay.
Yes, and I'm very aware of the difference, you know, when somebody really is a Christian. And I mean, when you really believe that, as opposed to sort of, well, that's a nice thought, I'll hang on to it, sort of thing, it makes a difference, you know. And I've heard, well, because obviously in the course of our nearly 45 years of marriage, we've conducted a lot of funerals for a lot of different sorts of people, as well as meeting people whose funerals we didn't do, but, you know, we knew of it. But, you know, sometimes people talk such pap about, you know, and they sort of trot out all sorts of weird platitudes. Oh, you know, Grandma's a star in the sky now, or, you know, I like to think of him sort of, you know, in heaven organising the kitchen, or whatever his particular job was. And you sort of think, actually, all this is not very helpful if you don't really believe it. But if you do really know the Lord, and you obviously, especially when it's somebody who you know really knew the Lord as well, actually the reality of it really is a strength and comfort. But I think, see, what you were saying about, you know, there was the sort of the scriptures you already knew were sort of coming to mind. And I was thinking as well, because, you know, we'd said when we were chatting about how we'd do this, so shall we share some of the scriptures the Lord brought at the time? But actually then I was thinking, well, now I come to think of it, there weren't any that were just specially at that time. It was all the reservoir that was already there. It really, that was kind of becoming real and coming. You know, I didn't discover something new in that sense. You know, it was just a real sort of strength and help that what I was walking in before was sustaining me now. I completely identify with that. That a lot of exactly the same experience really. That. It wasn't specific verses that were necessarily coming up that I hadn't, you know, learnt before, or that were necessarily meaning any more to me, but it was just the absolute foundations really of our Christian faith and what we believe and what we've already learnt that was being my foundation and my anchor through the whole process. It's made me realise how very important it is that we need to get the Word of God into us, and we need to get the Word of God sustaining us, and you know, inwardly digested, if you like, because you know, if you go through something that is really devastating, you can't necessarily take it in. You know, you can't necessarily kind of study and start to find things that are going to give you that strength, because you're all out of sync in your emotions and your the way you're thinking and everything. So you need those foundations there to sustain you through something. You need them ready, don't you? Yes, exactly. It's like, you know, if you're going to a strange place and you've studied the map beforehand, well, it doesn't look like the map, but you actually have an idea of where things are going to be. Yes, that's right, We'll have a look at there's a couple of questions have cropped up here. Anna is asking here, what can you do not to get stuck in your grief? Have you got any? Well, I can answer, I suppose, from my own journey to try and come out of that, and also as a Christian, I can't really how you deal with that if you don't have faith in Jesus and know that you know, he's already sorted everything out for us, and we don't have that hope. I don't know, but for me it was just, it all comes down again to trust. You know, am I going to trust what Jesus says, what the Bible says? There is hope. There is hope of eternal life, but there's also hope for a future here. That, you know, my future has changed, but God hasn't changed. My circumstances have changed, but God hasn't changed. He's left me here for a reason. So, and actually, one of the verses that I hung on to was "For such a time as this" from Esther 4. Right. So it was one that David had given me before he died, and just to, if anybody wasn't aware of that, so in the story of Esther, Mordecai, I think he was her uncle, wasn't he? Said to her,
the king she needed to do something that was difficult, and her uncle said, well, you know, maybe you've been brought to this position for such a time as this, and David had said that to me, you know, maybe, you know, God's taking me home, but maybe this is now your time, is for such a time as this, that God has a purpose for you. And that gave me such a hope and an excitement, which is a bit odd when you think of the circumstances, but you know, what is God going to do in my life and with me and through me? So that helped me personally to kind of keep going. But I mean, Anna knows me well enough to know that I do struggle still, not necessarily linked with bereavement, but I do struggle very much with a sense of sadness, and I have to fight it. I have to keep coming back to God's word, and am I going to believe this, you know? And it's all about relationship, isn't it? It's about relationship with God. That, you know, no matter what your circumstances are, if you have that relationship with God and you're in fellowship and you're walking with him, actually we can probably cope with a lot more than we think we can. It's just kind of when you tend to, for me anyway, if I tend to take my eyes off that and you know, don't keep my mind on eternal things, you know, then I start to struggle. It's a bit waffly, I know. I don't know whether that answers the question.
Well, I'm just looking, because see, Matt's also been sort of debating with Anna here. You know, it's a good question. It's a challenge, especially when you allow yourself to feel the emotions, you know. And then said, did you feel like there should be time limits to your grief? E.g., after 2 years I should be feeling better, that sort of thing. It's sort of talking about grief not being forever, you know, that actually it's a process that you have to work through, and I think we've both found there isn't any shortcut.
No.
You have to sort of process things through, and even when you have, it sometimes pops up again, doesn't it? But yes, actually it's the reality there's life after it. So, and I think you were beginning to hint at it there, that sort of sense that maybe, as well as it being the end of something, it's also the beginning of a new kind of life, and what's God got for you here, you know. So did you find that it was, you know, did you find some ways of focusing on that as you were beginning to emerge? Because obviously the first period it's totally filling the horizon, but you know, once you began to sort of have to start adjusting to life without David, did you find that?
Yeah, so I don't know, it's hard to put a time on it, isn't it? Because it's kind of an ongoing process, and you feel better and you think, oh, I'm having a good day or a good period, and then you have a bad period. So you might think that you're kind of through it, but you're not. So it's very hard to say. I have been asked, you know, how long did it take? Well, I couldn't possibly even pinpoint it.
No, exactly. And there isn't a textbook thing, you know, well, for 2 years you will do this, and then you will feel different.
No,
you know, I think anybody who particularly if you've studied psychology and the theory of loss, grief and mourning and all the rest of it, you could think that, yes, well, you know, there's a process to get, oh yes, I recognise I'm here now, so then I'll be there, and then I'll be there.
And
it
doesn't work like that.
No, it is much more personal. I think we'll take a pause now so we can just have a check through the live chat and sort of get hold of any questions that people may have. So if you've got questions, you know, bring them in now. We're going to listen to some notices and a song, and then we will be back in a few minutes to continue the conversation. Well, welcome back everyone. We have a couple of questions to look at, and there's a couple of prayer requests. One of the things we've been asked is what can we do as a church, you know, to help those who've been bereaved, especially when they're coming back to church after bereavement, because actually some people find even coming back to church quite difficult. I have known some people who kind of stopped altogether, which I don't quite understand the logic of, but you know, I know for a lot of people that's been quite a hurdle. Did you find it?
I really wanted to come back to church, but I had a long period of, you know, not being in church because of visiting hospital and things. So I was kind of ready for that, but I was very, very nervous. I was very nervous because you're so raw, aren't you, after you've lost somebody close to you, and extra sensitive. So, you know, anything that perhaps wouldn't normally upset you would quite easily upset you, and of course it did. I had some I won't go into detail, but I did have one or two things said to me that, you know, still I think, how can somebody be so crass and insensitive as to say something like that?
Yes.
And those things do sting a bit, but I think as well, going into an environment where you're suddenly met with a lot of people, that is overwhelming. People quite often don't really know what to say to you. So I mean, and I understand that, and I think perhaps really it's perhaps best just to not, you know, to say too little rather than to say too much, because words really, you know, what can you say? You know, words are a bit of a waste of time, really. So I think just a lot of understanding and a lot of sensitivity and care. And a lot of love, you know, and as well, I think I found it a little bit of a struggle, the loudness, you know, the fact that there was a lot of bustle, a lot of loudness. I found that quite difficult, and I suppose as well, I took it upon myself to assume that people were wanting me to not cry and not. You know, and wanting me to get over the grieving quicker. But that was something in my head. Nobody had ever indicated that to be the case. I'd put myself under that pressure. So I suppose just being aware that grief takes a long time, and if somebody needs to cry off and on for the next 6 months, 2 years, 10 years, then you know, so be it. If it's needed, rather than come to church and do that, rather than stay at home and isolate themselves.
Well, yes, I quite agree with you there. I think the important thing is to allow people to grieve, and to be sensitive to how they're feeling, and not to feel that they ought to do something else. It's like, you see, some people really don't cry in public. Well, you don't have to. No. But equally, some people get embarrassed about crying in public. I say, it doesn't matter. It's okay. You know, it's fine. If you want to cry, you cry. If you actually feel you want to talk about something entirely different for a bit, fine, you know, because sometimes that can be the thing. You've had enough of outpouring for a little while and you just want to change. Well, okay, you know. I think the advice I'd always have to anybody, you know, when you're sort of meeting with somebody, is let them set the tone, lead the way,
let them lead,
indicate what they want. If we can just somehow communicate that you know, we're there for them. And in any way that we can, we want to support and help them, you know. I mean, that, you know, at some points that can sometimes mean cooking a meal for somebody or doing something practical. Other times it might be being a shoulder to cry on, you know. Sometimes they might want to actually unpack their anger. I think particularly, you know, you said about sometimes people say things that are obviously not intentionally, but are actually very insensitive, and I can remember one or two of those as well myself, you know. And I remember a friend of mine whose mother died of dementia, and she had nursed her all the way through, and she wrote to me after my dad died, and I could identify with it. She says, one of the things I found so difficult, she said, I was so insulted by people assuming that I will now be so happy because I'm free and have a new life. And, you know, she's still grieving her mother at this point, you know, and I did have a comment like that said to me once. I thought, well, you don't understand, do you? You know. But I think, yes, if you allow people to feel how they're feeling, it's going to be all right, you know, and just be there and pray for them and support them however you can. And equally, be willing that even though you may want, you know, they know you care, they know you want to support them, but if you're not the person they want to talk to, don't be offended.
That's right,
Because not everybody wants to tell everybody everything. No. Some people do.
And you're not always in that frame of mind. No. Sometimes you don't, you know, you might have wanted to share with that person, but not right then.
Yes.
You know, you're not ready. You have to be ready yourself, don't you, to face it. And also hugging, I think, was an issue, because not everybody wants to hug. I mean, I know that where I used to work, there was a lady that just would want to hug everybody, you know, if they were upset about something, she'd want to hug them. And actually sometimes that's the last thing you want, because you're holding yourself together, and a hug can set you off, or you don't necessarily want to be hugged by that person. And sometimes it can be quite, it can seem a bit insincere as well. So I'd just say maybe just be a little bit careful about just assuming that hugs are always appropriate.
Yes, well, see, that's one of the things where people aren't all the same.
No.
Some people just want a hug. from anybody, you know, but you have to kind of be sensitive that some people aren't really wide huggers anyway, you know, and are much more sort of reserved with that. Well, again, they have the right to be like that.
Yeah.
You know, it's just the main thing is trying to sort of see where they're comfortable.
Yeah.
You know, and I think if you're not sure, then, you know, you can always say, I don't know what to say, but, you know, I feel for you, you know. If you want anything, tell me, you know.
Yeah.
But, yes, that's... But it is interesting, the coming back to church is such an important thing. Now, I'm just looking here, like Maddie has sort of put in a comment. She was saying how after Lloyd died, her husband, that's when she actually first came to the King's Church, and she says it saved me, you know. It really was such a help and strength to her. And Andy McAdams put a comment in here as well. I found it very difficult when Moira passed away. If I hadn't had the support of family, church and God, you know, and obviously he still grieves for her, but again, knowing you've got people supporting you and caring really helps. It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. And Matt's put, church is supposed to be messy. It's where we come to be real with God and with each other. I found wearing a mask and pretending things are okay is not helpful. I totally agree with that. I think there's still a tendency to wear that mask and to not be real. And I know that there are occasions where some things are appropriate and sometimes things are not appropriate. But I do think we need to be aware of just not pretending, and, you know, it's just the whole authenticity thing, being real with each other. I mean, how can you have a relationship with each other if you're not real with each other? You know, and that's something I am learning more and more as we go on, you know, because I think it's part of a protection thing as well. While you don't, if you're not real with people, they can't, you know, you're not opening yourself up to be quite so hurt, but actually you end up with no relationships because nobody really knows you, which is one of the things from, you know, having lost David, that sense of really being known and knowing that you get when, you know, in a married relationship. And of course I've lost that, so relationships to me are all are very important, authentic, deep relationships. You know, I find I'm maybe a little bit less tolerant of superficiality perhaps than I was before.
Yes, yeah. But interestingly, you see, that's part of how, as we begin to readjust to being ourselves in this situation without whoever the person missing from it is, it's also like, I think it's part of the thing, you know, the coming to terms with it and then beginning to learn that life can go on, as we were talking about earlier. But actually, in a way, it's almost like that opens up new possibilities for you. I mean, I know I've seen in you, you know, that in lots of ways you've blossomed, even though, you know, obviously it's very hard not having David, but actually being just Sally, you've actually blossomed in ways that maybe wouldn't have happened when you were on your
Yes,
own.
I agree with you, and I think I've heard people saying about suffering. I can't quite pinpoint where it was, but I have this vague recollection of somebody saying that they'd been through all this awful suffering and that they kind of almost, they wouldn't have had it any other way because of the outcome of that suffering has produced so many good things. And I remember hearing that and thinking, well, I don't know where you're coming from, you know, that's just not right. But actually, you know, I can actually see where he's coming from. And the Bible says, doesn't it, that suffering produces perseverance, character, and character hope. And you know, Jesus came in order to suffer for a purpose, and he tells us to take up our cross. So there's a lot in the Bible about suffering which kind of indicates to me that there is something very important about our suffering and about the whole what do you call it, I can't think what it's called, when the gold
the refining,
the whole refining process. So I don't think, I wouldn't get to the point of saying I'm really glad I went through that bereavement and that pain, because it was horrible. But what I am really glad about is the changes that I see now, you know, and the maturity, the spiritual maturity, and of course I've got older as well, so there's the natural maturity. So the outcomes of it, I can really see God has worked and used.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's funny because I remember reading a book, because I mean for me a lot of help comes from reading other people's experience as well as from talking and hearing other people's experience. You know, reading books where you kind of identify with what they're going through and everything. That's all that. But I remember reading one, it might be the same one you were referring to, of somebody who I think they'd been paralysed or they'd lost their legs or something, but anyway they were confined to a wheelchair because the legs didn't work, and after many years and a tremendous ministry, somebody had said to them, well, you know, wouldn't you like it, basically, wouldn't you have liked it not to have happened, or something like that, or wouldn't you like to be, you know, fully functional body and that, and they said, if you mean would I like to have 2 good legs now, well yes I would, but I wouldn't want to be without the experience I've gained through losing them.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's the thing, you know, when Paul talks about our present sufferings being, you know, nothing compared to the glory that's going to be revealed in us, it's not just, well, it's tough now, but you're going to get nice sweeties when you die. It's not like that. It's actually, this is related to what you're going to be. This is the process of producing it. So in a sense, it's worthwhile.
Yes.
But you have to trust God.
You do
to know that, you know, that He is actually going to bring out of this something really wonderful and more glorious than we can ever imagine. And it's related to this. It's not, as I say, a reward that's unrelated to what you're going through now. I think that's one of the really sort of key things there. Just looking to see if I've missed anything about. Because obviously people are making comments about, you know, Anna says church is the best place to cry, in her opinion. A bit about, and Maggie commenting, as we've said, you know, grief comes unexpectedly sometimes. Things can still occasionally trigger my tears for my parents, and it's 20 plus years since they died. Well, I can identify with that, you know.
Me too. And
when I read somebody else's book, I mean, I read a book by Jennifer Rees-Larkham's daughter, Sarah, who she had a baby who was terribly disabled, and they knew from the 20-week scan that this baby wouldn't make it, you know, and reading the story, it's incredibly moving, and but of course it has related to me because of my grandson who died, you know, and it was the same circumstance, you know. But actually, as you read that, it triggers all your own emotions, but it's like it's a sort of an encouragement and a strength. Actually, you know, you can come through this. And in the end, even if you can't see it now, God is going to wipe away the tears, and you'll see, there is nothing to cry about now. And I really find that such a comfort and strength. You know. Are there any other questions? I think we might have possibly already answered it. Jackie was asking if your perspective on grief had changed over the last 10 years, but I think perhaps that's what we've just been saying, really, about the change and the development. It's the sort of realising that everything has a point. I always think if you think there's a worthwhile point, you can go through anything. If you think everything is meaningless, pointless, it's all banged out of nothing for no particular reason, it doesn't mean anything, and there's no reason why there should be any point, why should it be fair, then that would to me be the grieving without hope. You know. But because